Good evening and welcome to a very special program. Joining us in moments in a world-exclusive interview after what are being seen as fairly positive talks between the Ukrainian and Russian governments, the Foreign Minister of Ukraine, His Excellency Dmytro Kuleba, who joins us from Warsaw, that's where he is presently. The talks themselves bring the hope that there may be a light at the end of the tunnel and that peace and hopefully a ceasefire in Ukraine may be a possibility. Remember, Ukraine has presented Russia with a draft agreement with far-reaching concessions, which it hopes can pave the way for a solution to a crisis that affects not just millions in Ukraine, but countless people around the world. This is an enormous crisis, a humanitarian disaster which just must be resolved. Mr. Kuleba, thank you very much for joining us on NDTV this evening. First, sir, right off the top, are you seeing Russian forces move away from Kiev and Chernihiv presently?
Well, first of all, it's a big pleasure and honor to be with you now and to do this interview. Thank you for the opportunity. Answering your question, I must say that we do not see a significant withdrawal of Russian forces. Moreover, the last 20 hours since the end of the talks in Istanbul, they were marked with some heavy fighting in different directions. And this is the problem. We do make some constructive proposals to Russia. We are seeking a mutually balanced solution, but we don't see how our constructive proposals are reciprocated by the Russian behavior on the ground. Because talks are being held, but the shellings of our cities continue, and the murder of civilians and the destruction of our towns and villages, they go on. And this is the biggest problem. The talks seem to be disconnected from the situation on the battleground.
Is there any movement at all, Mr. Kuleba, of Russians moving their tanks or armored vehicles away? Anything at all?
There was, we registered some minor withdrawal from northern districts of Ukraine last night. As of now, I'm not aware of any new withdrawals which are undertaken by the Russian army in Ukraine. They still control some substantial parts, of our territories in the south and in the east. And as I said, heavy fighting continues, and some of our cities, even in western Ukraine, continue to be hit with Russian long-range missiles.
So are you worried that all that Russia may be doing at this stage is essentially repositioning its soldiers or getting set to reposition their soldiers elsewhere in the Ukraine?
Well, Russia is not hiding its plans. Its military officials announced that they are preparing for an offensive in eastern Ukraine in the region called Donbass. And therefore, this tactical withdrawal from the north of Ukraine may be actually part of the relocation and repositioning effort instead of a constructive concession or a constructive step made by Russia. This remains to be seen. I do not prejudge the situation on the ground, but we are extremely cautious, and we want Russia's constructive words to be followed by Russia's constructive deeds.
Is there a worry that the war itself may shift almost entirely to the Donbass, where Russia may actually try to encircle Ukrainian forces because you are very heavily deployed in that region? Is that the real concern?
Well, the initial plan of the Russian army in Ukraine was built on the assumption that the war would be over in just a couple of days. Now we are in the second month of fighting, and now Russia has another ambition plan to encircle our forces in Donbass, to crush them, to destroy them. But the initial plan turned to be wrong. And we are working hard to make this plan wrong as well. I want to make it clear so that everyone understands the context. Ukraine is defending itself against a country that committed an aggression. The Russian tanks moved into the territory of Ukraine, not the other way around. And anyone who tries to find an excuse for the Russian military invasion simply disconnects himself from reality or tries to play in the hands of Russia and its narrative. So yes, we are fiercely fighting, it's true, but we are doing it because it's our motherland. It's our land, our people, and we do not trade with our people, with our territories, and with our sovereignty. So I hope that the Indian people and Indian government will support Ukraine in this effort, because this is a fair war. Yes. This is a just war. A country is defending itself.
In fact, we'll come to the government of India and its position in a moment. But sir, when I speak to you this evening, I understand your caution, and I understand the importance of you not to build up expectations. A lot of us around the world who want peace are really riding on that hope. But you are tempering global expectations. Is that because you don't really trust Russia when they use the word de-escalation, which has been used yesterday? You mentioned in the very beginning
the idea of the light in the end of the tunnel.
Yes.
And I would like to recall that the full sentence reads, if you see the light in the end of the tunnel, make sure it is not a light from an incoming train.
Right. Right.
So yes, we have to be cautious. We have a certain experience of relationship with Russia. They treacherously and unexpectedly attacked us in 2014 and took over our 2 pieces of our territory. They waged an uncaused, unjustified war against Ukraine, because we never attacked them. We never had the intention to attack them. And they are killing our civilians. More than 100 children had been killed already by the Russians in Ukraine. Some cities do not exist anymore because they were destroyed by Russian shelling and bombing. I myself, when I sleep in Kiev, I had to wake up 2 or 3 times during the night because of the air raid siren announcing that either a missile or a Russian warplane is flying towards Kiev. Why should I trust them? And more importantly, as I said, we do not see the connection between holding the talks with them and their behavior on the battleground. Yeah. So we have to remain extremely cautious. We have to test every word they say. We have to see that they follow their words with deeds, that they actually keep their word. Yeah. It's painful, it's dangerous, but again, we are on the right side of history. We are not attacking, we are defending ourselves. Yeah. And therefore, we have the right to demand that our rights are respected.
Mr. Kuleba, how close are you to ratifying and sealing an agreement? I ask because it's a simple question. What is the process ahead? As far as the draft agreement that you've given to them, is there a timetable, a schedule before they respond and then you respond to them? What's the way forward?
No, we are not there yet. We are exchanging ideas and trying to agree on some fundamental elements of the potential agreement. So we are far away from the moment when the document can be initialed or signed or put to the ratification. And as my president announced recently, when we see the final agreement, there may be some issues in it which will require holding a referendum in Ukraine, because we are a democracy and India is a big democracy too, and we can understand each other as 2 big democracies. Yes. That nothing can be done without the consent of the people. Yes. So reaching an agreement is difficult. But following all democratic procedures will be an exercise, a challenging exercise as well. But my president, our government are committed to peace. We want to put an end to this war. Yeah. We do not want anyone to die. Yeah. And it's not only Ukrainians who are dying, by the way, unfortunately. The one Indian student yes. had been killed by the Russians in the city of Kharkiv. Was a big tragedy, and I would like to take this opportunity to express my sincere condolences to the family of student whose name was Praveen, yeah. For his loss. Ukraine was always a welcoming home for Indian students, especially in Kharkiv. And there were no problems until Russia came. We helped to evacuate Indian students from Ukraine, but of course we hope that once we end the war and restore our cities, they will be back and they will enrich our society.
Mr. Kuleba, you have a fantastic ambassador over here, Igor Polika, who's been working pretty hard to try and explain to the government of India why India needs to change its position. But India has steadfastly maintained its neutrality. They've not voted against Russia in any international forum, not at the United Nations. Do you see that as being a real setback in your relations with New Delhi?
We understand that India has its own relations with Russia, and it tries to maintain that relationship under the circumstances. You mentioned the negative kind of sides of voting in the United Nations, but on the other hand, I can say that India did not vote against the Ukrainian resolution in the UN Security Council, as Russia was hoping to do. So it's true that India is trying to balance, but the message that I can send to my colleagues in the Indian government is simple. In this story, Ukraine is on the right side of history. And Ukraine has always been a reliable consumer of Indian products, mostly pharmaceutical exports from India, but also a guarantor, one of the guarantors of India's food security.
Yes.
We always supplied you with sunflower oil, with grains and other products. So this is a mutually beneficial relationship. And we have a request to the government of India to take advantage of the level of relationship that it enjoys with Russia and convince President Putin to stop this war.
Do you see Prime Minister Modi, Mr. Kuleba, being a possible mediator between you, President Zelensky, and President Putin?
Well, if Prime Minister Modi is willing to play that role, we would welcome his efforts.
Has there ever been any discussion or anything mentioned by New Delhi to suggest that they could or we could play a more proactive role in trying to work out the differences between Russia and Ukraine?
Not as far as I'm aware of.
Okay. But it's something that you would welcome, sir?
Yes, as I said, India has its own relationship with Russia. And if they can help us stop this war, which go against the interest of everyone, it's even not in the interest of the people of Russia. There's only one person on this planet who wants this war to continue. It's President Putin.
Yeah.
If Prime Minister Modi can convince him to stop the war, to restore global agricultural trade and security and stability, why shouldn't we be against that?
Sure. Mr. Kuleba, you mentioned a very interesting point when you spoke about Indian students and how they've been they've enriched Ukrainian society. There are lots of students watching this interview right now, students who are 4th year, 5th year medical students. They don't know about their futures, but they have a great love for your country and their Ukrainian friends. What is your message to them and their parents? What is your message to them, sir?
Until Russia arrived on its tanks and airplanes, Ukrainians and Indians lived in peace and cooperation. Ukraine was a welcoming home for Indians studying in our country. So please, take every opportunity you have in India to work, to convince your officials to make every effort to stop the war, to put an end to this war. And once we renovate our universities, once we rebuild our cities, you are most welcome to come.
Right. Mr. Kuleba, do you believe that the grounds have now been set for a face-to-face meeting between President Zelensky and President Putin? Are direct talks the only way to finally resolve this? Is this that stage? Have we reached that stage now?
Well, we reached this stage weeks ago, right, when the war started.
Right.
The only we all understand that the only man who is making decisions in Russia is President Putin. So to stop the war, you have to speak with him directly. And once Russia waged the war against Ukraine, we immediately came up with a proposal to arrange a bilateral meeting between two leaders to discuss how to put an end to it. My president is ready to hold such a meeting on any given moment.
Mr. Kuleba, how does Ukraine intend to protect itself going forward if you have accepted, as you have, a neutral and non-nuclear status?
We diplomats have a saying, nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. So until the entire agreement is prepared, consolidated and sealed, I would not say that we have agreed to any element of it. Everything is in the process of being discussed, including the issue of neutrality. But the neutrality is something that Russia is interested in. Our interest is security guarantees for Ukraine. Our interest is to have legal obligations and effective mechanisms of Russia that will prevent them from attacking us in the future. And this is our core interest. But as I said, we are discussing different ideas and different concepts with the Russians, but nothing is agreed until everything is agreed.
What progress has been made in getting other countries to provide legally binding security guarantees to Ukraine? That's something that you want.
Yes, that is exactly something that we want. Russia initially insisted that it should be a bilateral agreement, but we had a different vision for that, and we said that given the circumstances and the history of our historic experience with Russia, we want we want security guarantees to be provided by other countries too. And our initial concept was so-called P5 plus Turkey and Germany. P5 meaning permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. Since then, the list, we noticed that some other countries are actually willing to join the process and want to be helpful. For example, Italy indicated its interest, and we are working with them now on this. So every country that is willing to make a contribution to strengthening Ukraine's and Europe's security by concluding an agreement on security guarantees for Ukraine is welcome. We are ready to consider its readiness to participate.
Mr. Kuleba, Russia has reportedly said that they will not or cannot negotiate the status of Crimea because they claim that it's their territory. Are you confident that they will budge from this hardline position? I know that you've given a 15-year time period, and that seems quite reasonable. But the Russians have adopted a hardline position. Do you see this as being a real sticking point going forward?
We do not trade with our territorial integrity and sovereignty. Territorial integrity for Ukraine is as sacred as for India. And we will never recognize that the presence or the legal attribution of Crimea to Russia. Crimea was stolen by Russia. It was done in the violation of international law, and no one is recognizing this takeover, and Ukraine will never recognize it either.
Do you believe that Russia has chosen to de-escalate in areas because militarily they were stretched and were unable to continue their offensive, particularly in the Kiev region? Or do you believe that perhaps they didn't really attack many cities other than Mariupol and a few others to the true ability of their forces? Or do you attribute their failure to the success of Ukraine's forces?
Yes. Definitely, it's the success of Ukraine's resistance and defense that forced Russia to try to take a break, reposition, understand what went wrong, correct mistakes. But as I said, we heard the official statements coming from Russia, and they indicate that Russia is planning a large-scale military offensive in Donbas, in eastern part of Ukraine.
Yeah.
So there are no reasons to believe that they abandoned the idea of continuing their aggression against Ukraine.
Yeah. Mr. Kuleba, almost every second day we get satellite images of Ukraine and particularly of Mariupol. Can you describe to us the humanitarian tragedy in that city?
Mariupol is the scariest place on earth. It's the hell on earth. More than 90% of buildings and objects in the city are either damaged or destroyed. The city has no electricity, no access to water, nothing. Tens of thousands had fled. More than 100 is still in town, suffering, spending most of the time in shelters because Russia keeps bombarding the city and destroying it. Unfortunately, human life has no value for Russian army. They target civilians, they target civilian infrastructure, and they turned this city into a nightmare on the one hand, but also into the symbol of resistance on the other hand. And the more this city resists, the more ruthless Russian army becomes, and this is the tragedy. Hundreds of children had died in Mariupol because of this war, because of the lack. Some were killed by shrapnel, others died of malnutrition or of the lack of medical services. And of course, one of the most notorious crimes committed by the Russian army was the direct bombardment and shelling of the maternity house in Mariupol.
Yeah.
Where pregnant women and women with newborn babies found themselves under the Russian artillery fire. It's a war crime, and my Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, publicly in front of the cameras admitted that Russia attacked maternity house, being aware that it's a hospital and maternity house. So it's a war crime, and it will be prosecuted.
Mr. Kuleba, I was in Lviv a couple of weeks back reporting families being separated, women and children, the old and the infirm, moving outside your country to possibly Poland if they could. That is a really frightening and a really sad story, where you've got young men of a certain age across the Ukraine now, ready to fight for their country, but torn away from their children, from their wives, from their parents. Could you tell us about the incredible hardships that Ukrainians who've chosen to leave your country are facing with their loved ones still inside?
Well, what can I tell you? I haven't seen my own children in 5 weeks already. And the only way I can talk to them is on messengers.
Right.
I also have 2 dogs whom I dearly love, and I haven't seen them either. It's painful, it's devastating, but the truth is very simple. We understand a very simple fact. If Ukraine loses this war, it will cease to exist. And therefore we have to fight. We have to fight for our country at all fronts. Some took up arms and went to the front line. Others, like me, do diplomacy and fight on the diplomatic front. Someone else is working at a factory, producing something for the army. We simply have no right to lose this war. So this is the only feeling that allows us to live through all this painful stress and devastating feeling of being disconnected from your family.
It's just so difficult to imagine what you and so many millions of families are going through. One final question, sir. So much has been said. Actually, 2 questions. Firstly, sanctions. Do you believe that enough has been done to influence Russia to desist from the violence on the ground?
A lot has been done, but as long as the war continues, more needs to be done. So there is no point when one can say, okay, we did everything we could. No, as long as the war goes on and people get killed and towns, cities and villages get destroyed, it means that we have to do more on all fronts, including the sanctions front. Yeah. We already see the impact of sanctions on Russian economy and Russian elite, but some important and painful sanctions still have to be imposed, and we are working with partners on it.
One last question. We've seen some fairly harsh rhetoric from the US president against Vladimir Putin. He says that these are his personal views. But given the sensitivity of the issue, do you believe it's important to be moderate in the language which is used? Because it's right on the edge, and language itself can actually affect the outcome of the process that we all want, which is peace.
Well, everyone makes his or her own choice about the words which may be used to describe certain situation. Certain moderation of language is definitely necessary. Trust me, I have a lot to say. Yes. About Russia and about Russian leadership. But I do understand that sometimes it's not words who help you to win. It's deeds. It's very specific action that has to be taken. And this is why we do welcome tough assessment of Russia in documents, in speeches, in comments, but we are always looking at the actions, at what specifically was done by this or that actor in international relations to save a civilian life or to save a city from being destroyed. Words are important, but it's action that really matters.
Well, Mr. Kuleba, thank you very much for speaking to us, and hopefully the process which was really kick-started yesterday can actually move towards being something very, very substantive. The whole world is looking at Ukraine. India is so close to your country. There are so many people who want to return to your country, and hopefully there will be peace. But certainly, hopefully, the integrity, the territorial integrity of Ukraine is retained at any cost. Thank you, sir, very much for speaking to us.
Thank you, sir.